So hello and welcome to our Dinis Guarda Cities ABC Open Business Council series. Another fantastic interview and profile that I have here today. And I'm quite excited about talking with my guest, Adam Roosevelt, which has a fantastic profile for someone that is still quite young, but has been creating a global recognition in multiple areas that touch cyber and national security, compliance, military strategy, and as well the areas of even working in different areas of managing portfolios and sustaining mission essential programs for the US federal government in ITC, defense, private sector, and family offices. So just a bit of a bio from Adam. So Adam Roosevelt is a combat veteran, an armor reservist, and CEO of AR International Consulting and STEM North America. He was the nominee for Virginia House of Delegates in the Legislative District, Arlington, parts of Fairfax. And among some of the expertises of Adam, there's the specialization in cybersecurity and cyber as well privacy, IT, defense, homeland security, and business development and foreign relationships in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and of course in the US, where he's based. And he's a decorated Army veteran and public policy expert in foreign affairs, defense, homeland security, and all the areas of intelligence and financial service, which is a particularly interesting area. So Adam as well is a distinguished thought leader. He's been known from the mainstream media in the US, especially NBC, NewsMax, The Weekly Standard, Red Alert Politics, Virginia Pilot, and a few more that we can actually go through the bio that you're going to put as well continuously to this interview. And as well, Adam is a panelist and speaker with engagement that include a lot of high-profile governmental different and cross the road in terms of different areas from foreign affairs, energy, cybersecurity, homeland security, transnational organized crime, education, and economy, which are critical elements for our time. So Adam, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to our series.
Thank you for having me, Dinis.
So Adam, I'm particularly excited that this is going to be a profile interview, so it's not so much focus on the day-to-day of what is happening in politics. I think we can leave that for other media. So here I'm interested in your history. So I would like to start with the background of yours, and as well as someone quite new and quite young, sorry, that you have already a massive experience, but as well, I know that you went through the army experience and as well a background of a lot of hard working and a lot of discipline, but as well that made who you are right now. So if you could give a bit of this background of yours, especially in the context of how did you went to the army, your career from that, how did you start it?
Yeah, Dinis, I'll first say again, thank you for having me. And really, you've been a thought leader in the industry. So first, I want to say thank you to you and your team for the work you've done. Where I started was interesting. I first joined the cyber and the coding world when I was 15. And I was a kid who learned Linux, and I learned that you could boot operating systems directly from your USBs. And I first had the thought that I could change my grades. And I really became quite a bit of a computer nerd, learning command line, really doing things that were a bit troubling for someone my age. But that was how I started my IT cyber career. And then things naturally progressed, Dinis, and went on into the US military. And I specialized as an IT specialist whose job really was to specialize in all technology in the US military. I was trained in cyber tradecraft and collectively C5ISR. For the folks out there who don't know what that is, that's command, control, computers, communications, cyber intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I've built networks, I've destroyed them, I've configured applications, I've destroyed them, and more. And now collectively to this date, my career specialty is subject matter expert in a variety of fields, as you had mentioned: cybersecurity, offensive cybersecurity, IT enterprise management, cloud operations, national security, and public policy. And I'll tell you this, Dinis, my skill sets have been tested in combat, in the Middle East. I supported 2 combat operations in Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom and Freedom Sentinel, supporting the Department of Defense, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and I've also advised in senior capacities during wartime, war conflicts, and peacetime. So to date, I'll say collectively, I've supported over 60 major initiatives tied to complex operations in cyber and national security. And interestingly enough, in my downtime throughout the years, I graduated from a variety of different schoolhouses, Dinis, that offer highly specialized training. I'm an alum of the Army Signal Corps. I'm also an alum of the 7th Army Non-Commissioned Officer Training Command. I'm also an alum of NATO Communication and Information Systems School, University of Maryland, Trinity University National, and those you know, Harvard as well, and soon to be an alum of George Mason University. I have a variety of cyber certifications from various governing bodies and received national attention, as you had mentioned, on a variety of different networks. And that's kind of how my career had started and where we are kind of today, if you will.
Quite impressive, and I'm sure that it's just the beginning of a long journey. So I think one of the questions that I have for you, and I want to start with that, I think the human side of your background and the Army background. So as an Army veteran, and as just mentioned that you had some operations in Middle East and Afghanistan. So can you tell us a bit some of the most important challenges or some kind of case study where we had to deal, because I think sometimes we see the films, and I think especially for people listening to us around the world, of course, when you look at military, we forgot discipline, the education, the artwork, but as well the operations and what makes the integrity and the discipline to make this success. So I don't know if you just want to highlight a bit of that experience, because I think it's quite important, especially for people listening to us from all over the world, and we have a very diverse audience from different parts of the planet.
You know, absolutely. It's a great question, Dinis. And I'll tell you what the biggest problem that I experienced throughout my entire career, you know, really focusing even just in the Middle East, was there's a lack of education on what cyber and IT really is. A lot of senior stakeholders don't want to ask the hard questions because reputation is on the line. It shows that folks don't really know what cyber and IT operations really encompass. You know, so I would say use case number one for me, when I was in Afghanistan, I was assigned to the Ministry of Defense to work with the Afghan National Army, a part of the Train, Advise, Assist mission, which you probably are aware of, which with the U.S. military was going into the region to specifically train the Afghan National Army on cybersecurity, IT, policy, governance. Now, remember at this time, and even still today, the Afghani government is still destabilized and still working to build a modern infrastructure. So we're looking at them existing on a legacy platform, trying to build a modernized platform. There's a lot of corruption, and then folks don't really understand cybersecurity. So I had to go in and work closely with the Afghan National Army senior officers, the non-commissioned officers, the MOD senior leadership on really what is cyber from Cyber 101, and then moving into a space on what cyber expertise would look like to accomplish that in a very short period of time, and doing this in the middle of a war zone. So everyday lives are on the line. And if folks don't have the knowledge, people do die. Communications do go dark. And it's our job to make sure that those folks, when they leave the wire, they come back safely. So that was the hardest thing for me, essentially, was the education barrier and the nexus between life and death for every one of our decisions that impacted that operation.
Amazing. So one other part that I want to touch, and I think you touched, for me, one of the most elementary issues and actually concerns is definitely the lack of digital and technology by countries, governments, and most of the organizations worldwide, which is probably one of the biggest challenges we're facing nowadays. And of course, that creates all the different challenges that we have, especially when it comes to privacy, cybersecurity. So I want to touch that, and especially I want to touch that from your education and from the background of seeing, because one thing is seeing, let's say, cybersecurity attack or a security issue from the perspective of a civilian personality or someone in a company or in the business. The other thing is from a government perspective. And this is right now probably, or even from an army or something like that. And this is right now the most important thing when it comes to defense and the future of countries, because the countries that don't really manage this will have a lot of challenge. So I think in terms of your education, and especially the experience dealing with technology, cybersecurity, and IT systems, what have you been finding? Because I think that is important to highlight these challenges. We touch the challenge that probably passed, but I think especially how complex this is, and as well, probably how fragile most of the organizations are on this level.
Yeah. You know, I'll first say that infrastructure, as you alluded to, is very critical. I think that infrastructure is very difficult to focus on for underdeveloped countries. So we know that their infrastructure is legacy. For the first world versus third world conversation, cybersecurity is very different. So those are going to be very important things. And as you also alluded to, commercial versus government. You know, government has its focus. You know, there's mandates by the law, which the government has to comply with, whether it be the National Institute of Standard and Technology, whether it be federal government overlays for security controls and auditing procedures. You know, in the commercial space, there really isn't that need, so to speak. You know, the inside of the organization is driven by moving as agile as possible, delivering capabilities, turnkey solutions, and then effectively deploying that out to their customer base. It's when they have to serve the government that we really see some of the big compliance requirements. It's also when they step out of scope with the government's oversight of what activities commercial companies should be involved in. There's some companies on the aggressive side of data analytics collection and so forth. So there's a major conversation here as it pertains in different silos, public versus private, and then even legacy infrastructure. So very interesting dynamic there, but we have a lot to talk about. We could unpeel that if you like.
No, I want to touch this a bit further because I think this is for me one of the biggest challenges. So before we go there, I want to talk a bit about your career. So you are at the moment the CEO of AR International Consulting and SAM North America. So can you tell us a bit about the company and the work you've been doing, like you mentioned, between the private and governmental sector, and as well some of the areas you've been highlighting and during this work with this company and this organization?
Sure. So for the AR International Consulting, which I actually formed this company in Afghanistan with the anticipation that I'd be coming back to my home country to provide highly tailored cybersecurity services for any client. So our model's always been there's nothing too big or too small for us to handle. You know, we've had a tremendous amount of experience. You know, I got my first contract coming back to the United States with one of the major organizations, Department of Homeland Security. You know, I've actually worked with the Secret Service. I've worked with the Department of Justice. I've worked with Congress. I've worked with the Fortune 500 corporations like Leidos and Northrop Grumman. And I've got clients in the commercial space that are major law firms that I won't disclose here because I've got to be extremely careful. They may actually see this interview, so I want to be careful with that. But that company really specialized in the cybersecurity elements. It also specializes in intelligence. There seems to be quite a bit of a nexus between cyber and intel. You know, having the intelligence capacity, the capability, the folks from the NSA who are no longer NSA, the former CIA and Special Forces task force members who are on our team, they have a very specific tradecraft that, when put into the commercial space, provides a tremendous capability to our client base. Our second company, which is a very interesting one, it's like a divestiture away from the cyber piece and a focus on really the energy equities, the things that are oil and gas, and the things that are really all the green sustainable objectives, called SCM North America. And we stood this company up to really focus on chemical distribution for, you know, clean chemicals for our naval assets in the US military. We're looking at different things like public policy initiatives to make sure we're in line with the United Nations goals and objectives, and really just focusing on the good of the environment in that additional company we stood up. And that's the focus. So we have quite a busy job with maintaining a very different portfolio, but very important for the movement, I think, overall, within a variety of different spaces that are critical for economic and national security.
So I want to go through the work you've been doing. So part of the work you've been doing is working with C-suite executives, especially looking at portfolio and maintaining mission essential programs for the relationship between government organizations, especially the US, but as well defense and private sector and family offices. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think this is a very important area, especially the way the bridge between the technology, the money, and the security. And I think probably this is the biggest challenge that we face right now, actually for most countries around the world, but as well the challenge that come out of all this mix, because sometimes if you just miss one link, you can go in very dark sides. And I'm sure that is where most of the problems start for governments and for countries, for financial industry and so forth. So a bit of the work you've been doing on that, yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question. And a lot of folks don't really know what goes on in the government. So I'll give you a day in the life of a government contractor who is advising the senior leadership in the federal government. My job when I came in originally was to be a program manager, focusing on what we call the PPBE, which is the planning, programming, and the budget and execution of a program. And there's many different programs inside the federal government agency, but each one of them has a program manager who's responsible for, the program overall. My job was to engage the customers. We were actually a service provider, so I did a lot of customer engagement. I did a lot of conflict resolution. I did a lot of planning, for the budgets and execution of rough order of magnitude. All of the things that require the numbers, the requirements analysis, and then the solution engineering for those solutions effectively to provide a service to an enterprise. Enterprise operations can be very big. We were responsible for all 50 states and every asset for communication. That covers a variety of different things that we provide to our customers, to include cloud equities as well. So it was a major service provider. I was the program manager for a variety of different things, and I'll end on this one and move into the family office space. But cross-domain solutions, information sharing, how do you move and share information securely, expediently, to make sure that you're sharing key information with the right partners to coordinate on a variety of different national security missions, whether it be Secret Service doing investigations, whether it be FEMA for emergency management, and really getting into that space to engineer solutions so they can move their data. And then secondly, I'll say from a national vetting perspective, I was involved with national vetting operations, standing up IT assets, and really being involved with missions, advising the senior leadership and law enforcement intel to help them provision solutions and roll out, and then really build roadmaps, 5-year, 10-year roadmaps to make sure their capabilities continue to enhance. And then lastly, I'll say national targeting, which is targeting of terrorism, but using cyber assets and IT assets to keep those operations running in the field. Very, very important job there. So if we have a major 9/11 event, we would have the capabilities with our advice and our team to really get them positioned to have a real-time situation and respond effectively for conflict resolution. That's kind of a day in the life of my job was my job on the federal government contracting side. And then we moved into this dynamic space of commercial and family office, where family office is a bit different. You see things like needing to protect certain assets, whether it be phones, laptops, local area networks. We have ultra high net worth individuals who are traveling and are targets of other organizations or adversaries who may want to cause harm or take life of those individuals by compromising the IT and cyber assets. And that leaves that person at risk, and leaves their children at risk. Kidnappings can occur depending on the severity and the want and desire to have that person. So we provide a security perimeter around that asset, that human asset, and we deploy very highly specialized technology, really derived from C5ISR, to protect them and advise them and their children and families on how to really be positioned to be safe and secure. So we provide an impenetrable bubble for them. And that's kind of a day in the life of advising a family office as well.
So you ran for office, and I think you've been aiming towards a political career. So do you want to highlight a bit of your goals on that and ambition on that?
Sure. Ever since I was an adolescent, I've always had to, they call it strap your boots. And that was really my focus, was to give back to the community. As I began to evolve and mature over time as a leader in the community, I picked some very significant issues. I always wanted to use my national security background, my military background, to go after the hard problems, transnational organized crime and MS-13 and organized criminals who are exploiting neighborhoods. I always thought that was going to be a critical thing. Cyber, we talked enough about that, but delivering a cyber capability to the state that modernizes our infrastructure, keeps us ahead, keeps us competitive, and make sure our children have really an education platform for integration that they can be proud of, and they can join society as cyber experts, at a very early age. So that continued to grow. I gained national attention. I ran for the House of Delegates in Virginia against one of the most powerful members. I knew that it was going to be difficult, but I did it anyway because I wanted those issues to be brought to light. They're the issues of today, not yesterday. And we did that. And today, to date, we are advising members of Congress. We're advising candidates who are running on all of the things to be successful in campaign operations, public relations, and then really bringing the cyber piece in terms of public policy preparation and legislative action on the Hill. We're not lobbyists, but we are influencers. And that's really what our whole movement has been tied to on the political operations, is to bring the change, the awareness, and make sure that our folks are prepared to lead on the global stage.
So one of the things I want to touch, so you touch education, and I know that is very dear for you. So in terms of education and as well, all the relationship with the lack of education versus, of course, maturity of society and avoiding issues with crime and things like that. So how do you see the education and as well your goals on that, and especially as something that is dear to you?
Yeah, I see a very large partnership with the private sector. I think the private sector is the arm of innovation ingenuity. I think that the private sector is going to play a very big role with STEM as a whole, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Who knows better than the private sector? We're really the partner with the federal government, but we're really more on the innovation side because we don't have the red tape. So I want to be able to provide that medium to our children, not just in the US, but globally, Europe, South America, Africa, and even the Middle East, because we even have universities that we've partnered with that provide certifications to different people and professionals in the actual segment as a whole. So we've got children, we've got young adults, we've got senior citizens. We have C-suite executives that need training on what is cyber and how does it impact their reputation if they've been compromised. So we have an enterprise training focus, and we really have to realign that priority across the globe on what is cyber, how do we get ahead of it, how do we get smart, and how do we become more effective. And we got to pick a variety of taxonomy of topics that will kind of be phased in and integrated into our education platform across those multiple groups, and provide them a mechanism to obtain education that's not that too costly, but more affordable for the different groups that are out there.
So one of the questions I have here, so cyber attacks are increasingly one of the biggest proxy conflicts between countries, both small and big countries. And I think this is going to be a massive thing that is going to be scaling. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, it will be massively scaling because there's nothing more important than being able to, from an adversarial or combatant or even just a competitive perspective, to be able to touch your enemy or competitor from 100 miles away. The government believes it to be things of economic and national security. In some cases, the commercial believes it to be espionage and the theft of intellectual property. But yes, we will see an uptick. I think now with folks now having to really work from home, there's a lot of opportunities to compromise, these type of networks through an uneducated workforce. Email, the phishing activities, the lack of training when they click on emails, and then now they've given and granted access to these hackers, depending on what category they may be in, we'll call them hackers for now, but there's so many threat vectors that can be compromised. And now, as we saw with the recent SolarWinds and the FireEye activity, we know now trusted third-party vendors can also be targeted and compromised, through updates and mechanisms through trusted mediums. They can compromise that and impact both commercial and public sectors. So we will see an uptick because it is a get-rich-quick scheme. I think it's very easy to compromise a system. I've been able to do it. I was trained in a tradecraft. And once you're able to do that, you can really position yourself financially. Not that we're encouraging that, but that is one of the main motivations next to political sabotage and espionage. But I think economically, folks are looking to compromise systems overall to gain an economic up in society.
So one of the biggest areas, of course, that is going to be the biggest challenge for countries is the rise of artificial intelligence. This, especially in the context of military service, and challenges governments, challenges intelligence, challenges tech security and cybersecurity. But at the same time, for instance, last week, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, just presented over there in the US a program looking at using AI for defense and for actually quite bold in the sense that he said publicly that he thought that AI should be probably let choose some of the targets because the AI is well prepared for that. So that's a big statement, to say less. How do you see that, especially with your background, both as a former as a reserve military, and as well someone that has been in these areas for all your career?
Yeah, sure. First, let me say that, I spent most of my career as active duty Army person on the front line. So I understand the importance to automate war strike capacities in terms of packages that we'll deploy. We saw that with what happened with the Israelis in Iran. They were able to run an operation that allowed a drone to carry out a strike remotely, and it didn't require any personnel to engage the threat for target acquisition or even deployment of that package. I will tell you that there's been a lot of use cases, and you can look at Google's use case with their drone program that they did not too long ago. There was a major protest. Essentially, what happened was there were ethics concerns by the workforce that AI and developments of applications that were developed by Google employees, that if they were used for things that were nefarious, they have a model internal to the organization that they will not develop, in the context of anything that is evil or not good will not go forward. So they did develop that program, and essentially due to the protest, that program effectively, in Google's world, they decided to pull out of that program. So I think it's easy to say develop AI, but not understand what artificial intelligence is. It's not easy to just deploy an application, give it the autonomy to do target acquisition and packaging. But I think there'll be a marriage relationship in phases with the human element for the foreseeable future. Is it good to be able to automate? Yes, because we're pulling our warfighters off the front lines. But at the same time, there are also going to be innovative actions that we're going to see with these type of things, like attack on our critical infrastructure sectors, whether it be oil and gas pipelines with autonomous drones. And then the drones can do what's called a swarming technique, where you have a brigade of drones that could potentially be 200, and they move in a swarm capacity and deploy different types of payloads. And I can go in a variety of different directions as an expert here, but I'll tell you that there's a lot of good use cases in the military application, but we've got to be prepared for it also in everyday life, because that will be used effectively to gain control politically and economically and militarily on the front lines.
So one of the things that I'm focused in this series is really profiling some of the leading AI and technologists in the planet, and as well government. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in as well, I still have mixed feelings, but I would like to have your opinion about that. So recently, I'll use this as an example. So recently the French army got a green light for Bionic Soldiers. And this is actually official and it's public. Okay, it's not anything confidential or stuff like that. So, you being a soldier, a former soldier, military with a military background, how do you look at this? Because of course this brings a completely different level that, in one end, mixes technology, human engineer that we see in the old fiction from the Marvel films to James Bond and so forth. But this right now is happening. It's not future. It's present. So how do you see this? Because this is kind of very, very complex, but at the same time, well, it's fast growing right now. And it's even more advanced than what I mentioned before.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up. I'm very familiar with CRISPR and genome modification. I actually did speak on national news about this, and it's a very interesting time. So we have France and China, actually, two nations on the front lines of genome modification. I think they're going to be in an early phase of development, and then it will be a pilot phase, and then there will be a time where we can say they're more mature, and they'll be able to have conversations about, mirroring this technology to communicate with, autonomous drones and different deployable assets, for a variety of different use cases. I think we're far way off, but now that we've started this conversation, I do believe that it is something that will require a very scientific, innovative engine to bring it to light. Because the question is always, how do you sustain the energy of a said asset that may be, deployed inside of a human body? But if we're talking genome modification, that's a bit different. That's being able to be resistant on the battlefield from cold, being able to withstand, all different types of temperatures and more to provide, a multi-dimensional soldier. So you've got genome modification, you've got science on the cutting edge of what Elon Musk is trying to do with uplink technology, attached to the brainstem. And then you've got the ability for all of that to work cohesively together with drones and different, assets that may help give you the upper edge on the battlefield. And I think those are a big triangle of scientific innovation. And I am for the forward thinking, honestly, but I know that there's going to be ethics conversations. And again, I spoke on this many times and would love to look at this a little more closely, but it's definitely real. And I give it 5 to 10 years before we have some scientific breakthroughs, either in the US or even in other first world countries.
So one question I want to, without going into politics, because if you look at history of humanity, most of the innovation waves have been around military technology innovation, and then ideas, education, or cultural innovation. Mm-hmm. Definitely, this is a bridge, because if you look, especially coming back to augmented soldiers or bioengineering, this touch our very unique humanity. It touches as well breakthroughs in the idea of superhumans, which is not far from the book of Yuval Noah Harari that was interviewed recently by Mark Zuckerberg, and is one of the biggest thinkers on this. But as well, it brings a lot of questions about the ethics and the sense, because for instance, the United States is a democracy, but other countries are not democracies. So of course, there was a recently research as well, and I think I've been speaking with a lot of people, both in different areas of society, that the technology is not the problem, it's the way we use technology. It's like a knife, in this case is a bit more, but this questions our very concept of humans, because of course, I think from the moment that as you start having augmented soldier or you augmented humans, which we are partly getting that direction, we're going to have an accelerated advanced part of society, or at least some people. And as well other people that will be in other different directions and different velocities. So as someone that has been between politics, military, government, and education, what's your kind of positive views on this? And as well, how can we make sure that this doesn't go and create something really dystopic?
Yeah, well, I'll first say that, the 2 countries that have signed up for CRISPR and genome modification, let's just have a look at that for a second. It is China. We'll get too political, but the Communist Party is in charge and in control and is working to outpace other first world countries, specifically the United States. And I'm told, and data proves, that by 2028, that their GDP, in terms of their ability economically to bring in the revenue streams collectively, will outpace the United States. They've got to do that in a multitude of ways, innovation being one of them. But again, there's a much different government there. Let's look at the France folks. France, yes, are ally of the United States. And again, I won't get political, but the Legion, the French Legion, and those folks have always been, special operators, but with limited rights when they first sign on to effectively join that special operations unit. So the ethics community that has signed off on these particular things, just look at the political dynamics, the groups that are going to be targeted, and on our side, to hold the line for ethics and making sure there are no violations, is that 1, there should be volunteer bases. 2, there should be reports and oversight by the government on what's happening. Human trials, anything that would require, surgical or injection or changing of DNA modification, has to be tested on animals. We've got a variety of different species that we can use, whether it be gorillas, whether it be rats, whether it be any of those options first prior to human trials. So we'll need to be able to look at those things in a sequence of phased operation with oversight prior to deploying anything that would be concrete in execution.
I'll put it with you, and I think this is kind of the biggest challenge in the evolution of humanity in a lot of ways, but I think we have all to work with the different parts of society. So one of the points that I have here for you as well, so at the moment we are among one of the biggest crises in terms of health in history, probably in the history of humanity, because of course this happens in a very advanced state of development, and is having consequences both in terms of health, in terms of financial, in terms of governmental, because even during the Second World War, people could go out and plant some things and try to, and right now people get out and they're afraid. And of course, depending of the country where you base or the region you might have, but that's effectively a big pandemic going on that is affecting society. So this in one end is actually augmenting all the areas of digital transformation, and digital transformation in the space actually of the last year has been probably being fostered bigger than actually probably in the last decades. And I think it's going to be actually accelerated because probably still are ahead of 6 more months or 12 months or even more, depends of what you see of disruption on these areas. So one of the questions I have is, how do you see digital transformation at large, especially with your hat or your multiple hats, working in the civil society and the government and the military? Point one. So how do you see the digital transformation at large, especially right now that has been kind of augmented by COVID? And second is, how do you see the digital transformation in the defense sector that requires a new reality? Like you mentioned, for instance, right now with IoT advances and a lot of things are really becoming very, very accelerated.
Yeah. I think digital transformation is going to be driven by, unfortunately, political drivers. There was a conversation recently in the United States over the last 4 years, particularly on America First. So the technology that was being manufactured, the technology that was being built here in country would now rely on American innovation. That's the first thing we have to look at. Things will probably change to a more coalition-based supply chain, which we know global supply chain, we're all relying on each other. But I think the transformation is more of a transition to effectively new technology for autonomy. And I think what's being sold as like the top effort is artificial intelligence, leveraging artificial intelligence for supply chain management, which is very big. And as you mentioned, COVID-19, distribution has been one of the big challenges. That's going to be critical. And I also see not just the distribution elements, but there are components of distribution and artificial intelligence with like temperature checks of cargo ships, making sure that the temperatures are sustained over a logistic line so that that asset or product, COVID-19 vaccine, whether it be Pfizer or the other alternatives, are not compromised in transition. So that's one element of it, product protection and so forth. And then really having the dashboard and data analytics dependencies are going to be very critical with artificial intelligence to give you statuses on certain things, real-time transport, real-time activity, real-time check-in, RFIDs. So, that's where, you even see an intersection of some IoT things as well. But I think there's going to be a large conversation for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and more. But that's where I see I will call it the transition away from the legacy way of doing things and really trying to be more autonomous in our decisions.
Completely, I think it's a good one. So and we're passing 1 hour, so I want to stick around 1 hour, but just in question of your time. So one question I have is, so at the moment, if you look at groups of hackers, there's black hackers and white hackers. And for instance, there's at the moment some white hackers that have like over 1 million hackers in their ecosystem, and you can go for a couple of them. But if you look at black hackers, this is a big thing, and you have a huge amount of problems with ransomware, and the cybercrime is really going to the roofs, to say less. But as well, specifically in the areas of the bridge of invisible cybercrime. So, for instance, of course, I don't want to go into politics, but I think one of the things is probably on the finance world. So, for instance, one of the biggest challenges, not necessarily sometimes the crimes around taking money, but having ransomware or at least some kind of virus infiltrated in, for instance, in a bank. And for instance, there are cases where people are taking small amounts for like years without everyone notice. Or for instance, in the case of having total control. I know that there was a series of recent serious acts in the Pentagon and in different other military institutions. So how do you see this challenge now going from the theory to the practice and some practicalities that you've been seeing from your experience and career, because I think the challenge is definitely education and preparation, but it's as well about collaborative research and development that is key between countries. And if you see, even in James Bond, there's always a cooperation between the MI6 and the CIA or the FBI or something like that. And I think this is what makes the world a safer place, because of course, and of course the education and other things. But I would like to hear your views on this part of the collaborative and cybersecurity issues, especially on these risks that are much bigger from especially finance and military organizations, which can actually create a lot of damage for countries and destabilizing a lot of things.
Absolutely. And I've got an answer for you. So everything you said was correct. But let me give you some survey data. Back in 2019, a partner of ours surveyed about 200 banks. And they wanted to go in and understand effectively what was being done. And it was focused on the SWIFT transactions. And what was interesting was the attack vectors. One attack vector really attacked a loophole where hours of operation, that once the bank closed, SWIFT transactions were still being processed. You know, hackers had learned that, and they were targeting the SWIFT systems and were able to process these transactions. So by the time the operators came to the bank in the morning, the transactions had already went through and they lost millions of dollars in that time. You know, so what can you do better to audit these type of things? You could establish policy for thresholds. So you can look at the logs. You can have, you know, artificial intelligence programs to detect anomalies. And another thing that was discovered was insider threat, intentional and unintentional. So we saw these type of things, and understanding insider threat programs and standing those up was critically important. And then the training elements were also important, as you mentioned, with like, you know, the employees inside the bank not clicking unknown emails without verifying those. And the survey proved across a multitude of sections really where the areas of issue were and how to deploy and what solutions to deploy to mitigate those threats, particularly for the banking industry. And then on the military side, it's a much larger conversation. There's a bureaucracy, a lot of policy, a lot of oversight, a lot of governance. That's a big thing. But more importantly, there's too many players, a lot of different thought processes, frameworks, and more. And I think we've got to work through that. And again, that's why the commercial side is more agile, can move fairly quickly, make decisions and change. And then the government will take some time to make decisions and then change and adapt to the trends of today. So that's just one use case I wanted to pull for you. In case there are banks out there that are interested, we're definitely positioned to support those type of operations, given the data that exists out there. And I'm sure things have changed up until to date, 2021.
Very good, and I really I agree with you that it's about the collaboration and the way we can actually get all these organizations going on. So I have my last two questions and questions of your time, but I think it's quite there's quite intense things we've been talking here. So I want to go for one very intense as well. So a lot of right now, especially if you look at surveillance systems with digital twin cities in the areas of smart cities or even cities, and as well looking at IoT sensors and a lot of integration of AI is already creating new solutions in kind of minority report kind of scenarios. This is a very sensitive area, but it's a critical area because, of course, I think no one likes to be surveillance, but of course, for instance, I live in London, UK, where most of the city is full of cameras. And of course, if something happens, you like people to see what happened. So I think in London, I think it's quite normal. But I know that not everyone thinks like this. And of course, you have to consider the privacy versus other things. So as we have, for instance, already some governments with social scores and going very fast on that, how do you see these developments, especially when it comes to kind of the minority report kind of scenario of surveillance and protection and security? Because this is probably a big thing, especially for your areas of research and for your areas of expertise.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, we got different geographical regions, we've got different government structures, and we have different continents and countries. And every one of those are different, but also play a major consideration factor here. And I'll just tell you, like the US, we saw what happened with Edward Snowden in the prison program and their surveillance there. In Saudi Arabia, we saw MBS, and there was a movie documentary on the Netflix channel that just came out about the big journalist who was killed in an embassy But it was uncovered that a lot of the surveillance activities were happening and they were in a covert fashion from an intelligence perspective. Now, I have no thought process in this as a whole right now, but I'll just tell you that it's going to be driven by the government and their policy and the way they see law in protecting the bridge of national security. And then there's going to be always a need for covert, intelligence, which every country is involved in, to get ahead of the competitors, especially the ones who are in power, and to really keep an eye on it. That's what the CIA does. That's what the MI6 does. Everybody does it. So we're in an environment where you've got homeland surveillance, and then you have foreign country competition trying to surveil to stay ahead of national security threats. But we're going to always see that. I think that's going to be something that happens. And then I had one more spin to this that I think you'll like. Social media-wise, there are people who are also using intelligence control and also influencing the ad campaigns, buying up ad space. So the intelligence campaign as a whole has morphed to a multi-dimensional campaign that seeks to keep track on people. It also seeks to control, and it also seeks to really be prepared to detain, and more effectively litigate a case for national security purposes. So those reasons are very interesting, but a large conversation to be had there as well.
I completely agree. This is about the conversation and as well creating international standards, because I think it's the only way to make sure, especially like you mentioned, and that's actually what a lot of people has been mentioning, some of the most wise voices is we are all on this together, especially if you let some kind of players go and do whatever they want, of course, to create a very dystopic world. So one of the questions, and especially in follow-up on this, is, so we have a very accelerated digital world, or world in general, where technology is changing super fast. And of course, right now you mentioned AI, we mentioned surveillance, we mentioned IoT systems, cybersecurity, ransom attacks, and all these different things. So this is happening as we speak. And for instance, some of them have a massive impact for society, for business. Even just a month ago, or it happens actually once in a few months, there's massive attacks that can even take the likes of Google down, at least for minutes. Hopefully it's just for minutes, but it's still quite alarming. But one of the things that for me is key, and it comes back to the question I asked you about education, but in this case, not education just for young people. For instance, I live in Europe where the population is becoming quite old. If you look at Japan, the population of Japan is quite old. And a lot of countries, we have a lot of different velocities of looking at technologies. For instance, you and me, we are quite digital savvy because you're younger than me, but you have that experience and as well kind of a digital point. But one of the things I've been feeling, and as well I've been teaching as well in universities and business schools, is that most of my students, and actually most of the elite of teachers, have no digital clue. They might all use 5 hours of phones per day on devices and computers, but that doesn't mean they are digital literacy, they have knowledge. But this becomes more dangerous as we go for more senior people that are the C-level people that are on their 40s and 50s and 60s and even more. And that is a big challenge because these people have much less digital education. And sometimes it's even difficult to process some of this innovation. It's not their fault. So I think from your experience working with these organizations and as well making the bridge with a lot of different kind of institutions and even with an experience with politics, which is very important, how do you see this kind of continuous coaching and continuous education? And I want to just use an example to finish that to see the gravity and as well the urgency of these areas is that, for instance, I've been working with major global organizations. And for instance, I was in a meeting and I was in a meeting with 5 lawyers and in one of the biggest top corporations in the planet. And I saw a young lawyer, okay, I'm talking very young, just putting a password 1, 2, 3, 4 to an entire database of millions of billions of dollars. And are you really using a password like this in front of me that I'm a guest here? But just the fact that you're young and using a password, you realize how you're putting your entire organization in jeopardy, and as well the stupidity of what you're doing. And the guy looked at me, probably no one actually had ever told him that. And he was kind of, yeah, you're kind of right. But the point is that this happens every day. And I think that's why people like you, we need to get more visibility, but we need as well to go through the details, because I think this is happening every day, and it's not just people that lack education, but this is very C-level, very high-profile people, lawyers, CEOs, and so forth. So I just want your views, and I think I want to highlight this, as you can imagine, as an important area, even to wrap up everything we're talking here.
Yeah, I would say we've got to look at what the problem is, and the problem is convenience and memory, of course. There's opportunities for us to maximize on that and really close the gap of the issue. And really by doing that, I think will help move forward. There's passport generation solutions. I know the government has a key fob passport generation that automatically generates a password, but it communicates with that system application, allowing you to simply effectively do random passwords. You know, most people use the same password. So if one is compromised, then all their systems are compromised, from emails to government computers to, you know, anything else in terms of banking. So I think that may be an opportunity for us to exploit. I think we've got to change the culture, and the only way to change the culture in this case is convenience. People want to move fast. They don't want to have to think about a long password that's difficult. I know Apple has done a service that allows you to just automatically insert a password, but nobody uses it, primarily because it's too long and too complex. So it has to be reasonable, I would say, and it has to meet the convenience needs of the user. But you're absolutely right. Everybody does it, even the cyber experts, and I know they do it. But we got to attack the issue at hand, which is convenience, and what can we replace that with that's secure and effective across the board.
Completely, and I think it's important. And I think, like you said, this is a great opportunity, because I think we need to tackle this, and this continuous education, coaching, and as well, a lot of universities are tackling this, but probably not still in the details, and especially governments have to highlight digital literacy and the importance of this, because in the end of the day, I think there's a couple of authors, and I'm one of them, that mentioned that a country that is not digital literate will be taken over by other countries. So my last question, and I think we didn't touch this, but with your experience in family offices and financial expertise, and as well advising organizations in these areas, as you know, of course, in the last year in particular, the crypto world exploded. And of course, there's a lot of innovation from a blockchain perspective, but as well, there's all the areas of crypto speculation and creating almost like a parallel financial world. And at the moment is becoming mainstream with the cryptocurrencies around 6,000 to 7,000 in the world. But of course, a huge part of this Bitcoin passing all of them together, $1 trillion, which is a huge chunk of the whole economy. And then we have the likes of JP Morgan and all of others using this. So in one end, crypto is a parallel digital financial world. Of course, it's creating a lot of solutions for digital solutions for banks, so central banks, digital currencies, which is already in motion in multiple countries, including over there in the US. But how do you see this, especially with all the complexities of cryptocurrencies and the different areas? Of course, I think still, if you look percentage-wise, the sums in cryptocurrencies are much smaller than the real money. Ironically, I'm talking percentage-wise, but of course, the perception sometimes on public is not the case. But I would like, just because in the end of the day, cryptocurrencies come precisely from crypto security or encryption. In the end of the day, the name cryptocurrencies comes from encryption, digital currencies. That's what is Bitcoin. So I just would like to have a bit of an overview on this area, which is quite big and right now more important than ever.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big area. I mean, I'll tell you the two things I'd like to say first are encryption, anonymity are very important. I think there's going to always be, and this goes back to my time in Linux days, freedom with excellence. That's the reason why we believe we wanted to pull away from your traditional non-open source technology, if you will, and compare that to the banking industries. We're looking to divest away from being under a thumb of control without having the ability to have some anonymity and mobility to make payments. But we got to make sure that it's encrypted, which is important. But in the capitalist society, and I'll say there's always going to be competition. So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of benefits with blockchain and also cryptocurrency. I think being able to transfer currency to anybody, anywhere around the world is a beautiful thing. Obviously, it's going to continue developing, and you mentioned some shortfalls, but I think this is is something that's really critical. I was around when they were looking at the tumbling services using the Bitcoins, and there were tumbling services on the dark web effectively that, essentially allowed them to obfuscate for anonymity purposes the transactions. So, I've got a law enforcement background there, and I know that's a big conversation about bank accreditation and compliance, which ones are, which ones aren't. But that's a large conversation that, I'm ready to have. I think it's innovative. I think I'm always supportive of those innovative solutions. But again, I'll leave it with mobility, encryption, convenience. Those top three things are value propositions, and the market segments there are going to be the folks who are young, the innovators, and then the high-end folks who are looking to divest and or invest into new technology streams that have major growth potential in multiple markets.
I think you put it in a very good way. So my last question, and I think this one comes out of your answer right now, but I have to ask. So as someone that is, of course, very deep into cybersecurity and you've been showing a fantastic level of expertise that is amazing, and it's a pleasure to talk with you because it gets me a lot of ideas, and definitely I think we're going to have some follow-ups on this, or at least some panels with other people. But so you touched the darknet or dark web. So do you want to elaborate a bit about this? Because of course there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of probably prejudice and actually level of knowledge or lack of knowledge on this. So just top level for people listening to us, I think probably we could do an entire, not to actually in some of these topics we could do entire podcasts on this, but I want to stick with that last one. So from your background in terms of darknet and dark web, because like you mentioned, there's a lot of studies that probably the FBI has been using a lot of encryption systems to look at crime, and all the major agencies around the world, of course, have been using this. And the dark web partly was developed as experiments within the military ecosystem, and then it became this crazy ecosystem that is right now massive. So I would like to give just a top level overview for people listening to us, because of course it's a massive question, but just how do you see that? And as well some of the challenges that you see there.
Yeah, well, first I'll say, let's put it in a very easy analogy for folks out there to understand. Everybody understands the electric grid. You're on the grid or you're off the grid. You get in trouble for living off the grid, and the government comes and tells you that, you have to be in compliance. So the internet's no different. There's a public internet, and then there's a non-public internet, and it has the same benefits. Trading goes on. There's a bit of anonymity. There's a bit of convenience. There's not a lot of compliance except for the governance models that have been created within the dark web. I'll give you one location of difference of offering the products that exist, like on the Silk Road. And that's a location you can go on the dark web and you can buy products that are not open and available on the market. Unfortunately, there are things on that market that are sold like human organs, drugs, and so forth. And there's been a lot of law enforcement activity with trying to disrupt and destroy those particular networks, but they do exist. They do continue to mature. There are benefits, pros and cons to its existence. Even though there may be bad products there are also good products there. But again, it's about regulation, control, and really ethics, I will say, from the government perspective. But, there are a group of people who don't believe in that and would prefer to live off the grid for any reason, whether it be positive or nefarious. But again, great conversation, but I think that analogy kind of helps at high level, thinking of the electric grid, which are on the grid, and then off the grid, where this particular web does exist, given what we're talking about, to put it in context.
Fantastic, and I think I like the analogy. Actually, I didn't saw it that way, which is fantastic. It's a great way to put it simple. So Adam, it's been fantastic. I have plenty of other questions that will take us probably for a couple more hours, but I'll stay here. I appreciate your time. It's been an honor, and that's all. I'm actually quite excited about the different areas, and I think you're straightforward looking at these areas in a very practical way, which I think is very important, because sometimes, at least I get lost in the challenges, but you need to look at the practicality on that. And I think I kudos for your experience and for the work you've been doing. I wish you all the success. It's been an honor, and definitely we will follow up with other things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dinis.